Okay, we are recording. Welcome everyone to our second session of our Empowering Caregiver series for 2021. My name is Allison. I am the Associate Director of Social Work at the Penn Memory Center. And I am very, very excited to introduce Andrew Morton today, who's going to put on a fantastic presentation for us. Andrew Morton is an award-winning playwright and theater maker who creates socially engaged theater with and for vulnerable populations. His work has been produced across the United States and internationally. Originally from England, Andrew holds a Master of Arts in Community Arts from Goldsmiths College, University of London. He's currently based in Detroit, where in addition to working for TimeSlips, and I'm sure Andrew will go into detail about TimeSlips as an organization, he works as a teaching artist and facilitator with a variety of social services and arts organizations. He was also named 2020 Kresge Artist Fellow. I hope I pronounced that correctly. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Andrew.
Thank you, Allison. And yes, you did pronounce that correctly. It's actually the Kresge family that was the K in Kmart. Although I know there's very few Kmarts I think left, sadly, right? But yeah, certainly a foundation that provides a lot of great support to the Detroit area and several other places in Michigan. So, well, thank you everyone for having us, and thank you for that lovely introduction, Allison. I see a few more people are kind of coming in, so I will maybe hold off a minute or so till I sort of dive into the full presentation. But as you already heard, my name is Andrew and I work with an organization called TimeSlips. And what we're going to experience today is a virtual version of a new program that we rolled out just in the last couple of years called the TimeSlips Engagement Party. You'll learn a little bit more about why it's called an engagement party shortly. But I want to let you know that the presentation today will be a little bit of a combination of me discussing through some of the basic kind of core concepts of TimeSlips creative engagement strategies, but there'll also be some opportunities for you to participate at whatever level feels comfortable to you. Our work is certainly something that I think needs to be experienced to fully understand. And even though we're not able to gather and meet in person, I've led quite a few of these sessions now on Zoom, and I think we can still find ways to kind of create and be joyful together using our technique. So there'll be a demonstration where we'll do a creative storytelling exercise. And we'll use the chat feature primarily for that, for you to engage. So again, you don't need to necessarily worry about having your camera on or your microphone on. You can simply engage with the chat. And then there will be another moment where I will ask for one volunteer who would be comfortable at least turning on their microphone. For that moment, I'll actually ask everybody to, if they're comfortable, kind of turning off their cameras, because we'll do a sort of simulation of what it's like to do creative engagement over the phone. And then there'll be some time for questions and a sort of conversation afterwards. The presentation itself shouldn't take any more than 90 minutes. So I know we've got 2 hours together, so we should have plenty of time to get through the content and also answer some questions and have a conversation after following. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, so you'll see the start of my presentation. And once again, we'll be using the chat a little bit throughout the presentation. If you have questions that sort of come up during the presentation as well, feel free to drop them in the chat. I may be able to respond to them in the moment if it's kind of connected to the particular content I'm talking about, but if not, I know Allison will help sort of like kind of keep a track record of questions that came up during the presentation, so we can make sure we answer those at the end of our time together. So you've already heard a little bit more about me and what I do outside of TimeSlips, and you heard that I'm a playwright and theater artist, and in addition to working with TimeSlips, do many things. But I will say that I'm very honored to work with such a wonderful organization, particularly as most of the work that I do with TimeSlips is working with meeting family caregivers like yourselves, and encouraging folks to lean into their creative muscles a little bit and use creativity as a way to connect with those that we might be caring for. And I really enjoy working with this organization, and also, like I said, really enjoy the fact that I get to work with and meet so many wonderful, inspiring people as part of this work. I'd love to know just a little bit more about who else is here in the room today, so we can use the chat feature for that as well. I imagine most of you are probably in the kind of Philadelphia region, but if you're a little further afield, just drop your name in the chat and where you're joining us from, and if there's anything in particular you'd like to share about, if you are actively caring for someone in your life right now and you want to give just a little snippet about that, that would be helpful. There may be times that I can during the presentation kind of refer to anything that I see in the chat there. So again, if you want to introduce yourself to me and the other people in the room here in the chat feature, you can just say your name, where you're joining us from, and anything else that you would maybe like to share. So you can do that now and kind of continue that if we have people kind of coming in during the the presentation as well. Moving on, we're also going to start with a little bit of a creative exercise as well, and you can also respond to this in the chat if you wish.
Hey, Andrew.
Yes.
Chat's disabled.
Oh, Allison, are we able to? I might be able to change that as co-host. We'll see. Did that make any difference?
Good. Thank you.
All right. Fantastic. I was thinking, I was like, wow, this is a shy group. Nobody wants to introduce themselves in the chat. So there we go. Thank you, Justine. Yes, so you can introduce yourself in the chat and you can let us know who you are, where you're joining us from, anything else you'd like to share. And if you'd like to respond to the question that is on your screen now, this is what we at TimeSlips call a beautiful question, and you'll learn a little bit more about what that means later on. But the beautiful question is simply, how do you greet someone you love? So if you want to, I'll give people just a little bit of moment to type. So introduce yourself, and if you want to share a response to the question, how do you greet someone you love? You can go ahead and do that. Thank you, Russ. And Allison says she greets people with a big hug. Oh, lots of hugs, lots of smiles. Thank you, Kathleen. Great. Again, lots of hugs and smiles and kisses. And thanks for letting us know where you're joining us from too. Those of you that maybe just came in the last couple of minutes, I'm Andrew from TimeSlips, and I'm joining you from Detroit. TimeSlips is actually a relatively small organization. We're a remote organization as well, so we have staff kind of spread out a little bit all over the country. And I'm the only person in Detroit, but got a few colleagues in the kind of Milwaukee area, Cleveland. No one in the Philadelphia region, I'm afraid. Although my parents do live not too far. My parents recently moved to Easton, Pennsylvania, to be closer to my brother and sister-in-law and 3 grandchildren. So I'm hoping to get out there again and visit them pretty soon. All right, well, thank you again to those that shared your introductions and your responses to the beautiful question. Again, if you just joined us, we're just asking people to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know who you are, where you're joining us from, anything about you in terms of your practice as a caregiver. And if you want to respond to the beautiful question on the screen, how do you greet someone you love? You can. So going back again and just looking at some of the responses, a lot of hugs and kisses and smiles. Love it. When I would ask this question, maybe depending on where you are in the world or your sort of comfort level, if you're still out in the world wearing masks, I feel that my, where I would usually maybe give people like, a big smile and a hug, I felt I was doing a lot more of like very enthusiastic waves, right? Because if you couldn't see my mouth, at least you could see like my hands, kind of trying to give you maybe a hug with my hands, right? Great, thank you, Jessica, joining us from South Jersey. Fantastic. All right. Well, oh, Justine, great. Love to hear that you're a certified TimeSlips facilitator. Fantastic. Well, when I'm in need of a volunteer later on, not to put you on the spot, but if that's of interest to you, I might be able to kind of lean on you a little bit more. And thank you, Nell. All right. So moving on. we'll come back to the conversation about that beautiful question and what exactly a beautiful question is a little bit later on. But before we dive into the sort of meat and potatoes of this presentation, a little overview of what we'll do today. You'll learn more about TimeSlips as an organization and sort of what we offer. So if you have never heard of us before, don't worry. We will give you the kind of rundown of what we do. And if you maybe heard of us before or you're familiar with our work, it'll be a little bit of a review for you. And then we'll go through what we call a virtual engagement party. And I'll tell you a little bit more about why we call this an engagement party in a moment. But during this time together, by the end, hopefully you will leave learning some simple techniques that you can use to use creative engagement as a way to connect with others. So again, a little bit more about TimeSlips as an organization. So for over 25 years, we have worked to work with care partners to do what we often say is replace the pressure to remember with the freedom to imagination. And by doing that, we hope to bring meaning and purpose into the lives of elders and those who care for them through creative engagement. And now I've used that phrase a couple of times now, creative engagement. If you're not entirely sure what that means, don't worry, we'll dive into that a little bit more. One example of the types of creative engagement that we offer is on our website and through our training and in-person work. We provide people with prompts and online tools to use creative storytelling and other engaging ways, activities as a way to connect with people of all ages and abilities. While we as an organization sort of began our work primarily supporting caregivers of people living with memory loss, much of our techniques can be used really anytime that there's maybe a challenge to communicate or connect. And so while some of the content we'll talk about today will be a little bit more focused to kind of memory loss and dementia, if that is not something that perhaps is in your kind of direct experience as a caregiver, that's okay. And even in the sort of Q&A time afterwards, we could probably talk about if there's other sort of contexts where you'd be curious if maybe that these techniques could work. I'd be happy to discuss that and share some other examples of how people use our techniques. But as a sort of larger sort of goal as an organization, we do try to harness the power of imagination and creativity to change the way the world understands both aging and dementia. So we're going to watch a very short little video now. And it just occurred to me that when I was sharing my screen, I did not do the audio settings. So I'm going to have to just stop sharing a little bit so I can fix that, because I want to make sure you hear the beautiful narration for this video. So just bear with me 1 second while I fix that. There we go, we're back. Okay, so a couple very short video here that will just give you a kind of brief overview of, again, TimeSlips, who we are, and the kind of basic core concepts of our creative engagement techniques. So here we go.
What is TimeSlips? We are a nonprofit inspiring a global movement to bring meaning and joy to late life through creative engagement. Let me show you what I mean. When the changes that come with aging meet the demands of our daily lives, it can be difficult to connect. Even if we want to connect, it can be hard to know how. When we do try to connect, our impulse is to draw on the past. But for people with memory loss, this approach can lead to shame and embarrassment, focusing on who the person was rather than accepting and valuing who they are now. TimeSlips offers another approach, to shift from the expectation of memory to the freedom of imagination. In the emotional and symbolic language of the arts, there are no wrong answers. People we thought might be lost to us, we can reach with sound and movement, with words and images. We can find joy again, together, connecting through creativity, one-on-one, at the bedside or kitchen table, or in groups, at libraries, memory cafes, museums, or in assisted living, senior centers, or skilled nursing. TimeSlips is fueling a creative care revolution to change the way we think about late life and how we engage with elders, from a time of isolation and loss to a time of growth and meaningful connection. Connect through creativity with TimeSlips. Learn more, timeslips.org.
All right, well, that was our intro video. So I hope you enjoyed that. And I hope that it also gave you a little bit more context and background into us as an organization and the type of work we do. Also going back to that idea of creative engagement and what it means, what exactly that means. Hopefully in a couple of the examples you saw in the video there, connecting, having conversation with people, kind of using different visual prompts or prompts that maybe are outside of your window, and then sort of thinking about how can we use creativity as a way to connect. But earlier on, I said that what we are experiencing today is called the TimeSlips Engagement Party. So I want to now tell you a little bit more about exactly what that means and why we call this experience that. It is very much an intentional kind of play on that phrase, engagement party. While we're not here to celebrate folks getting engaged to be married, we're focusing here on a different type of engagement, right? But we also want this to be a joyful and playful experience. And so we created these programs as a way to let anybody who wants to offer an engagement party. And so we describe these often as informal and joyful gatherings for those who want to learn how to creatively engage with friends, family members, and that could be members of your biological or chosen family or neighbors, anyone who might be lonely, frail, or perhaps experiencing memory loss. And during the engagement party, at the end, guests will walk away, hopefully knowing a little bit more about some simple creative engagement techniques that can be used to create what we call shared moments of imagination with no right or wrong answers. And so to do this, we sort of structured the engagement party experience in 4 steps. So we'll go through those in a moment. But first, I imagine that many of you coming to this as caregivers of people living with memory loss, or people kind of working with people living with dementia, you may know a lot of this information already, but just in case, and because often we also created this program as a way to help people that might be very new to this, maybe if it's a family member has a recent diagnosis, or perhaps older adults, their friends are starting to kind of maybe get a diagnosis and they're not quite sure what to do or say around that person. And so maybe the world of this disease might be quite new to them. We do like to just sort of set the stage with a few just little tidbits of information about aging and dementia so that we're all on the kind of same page moving forward. So right now we know that more older adults than ever before live alone and might experience isolation with the loss of friends, or as family members perhaps move away or are busy with work or other obligations. Of course, over the last couple of years as well, as many of us experienced sort of separation from family and loved ones, co-workers, I think we've all had a little bit more of a taste of just how big the impact of social isolation can be, both on our mental and physical health. And before that, studies have shown that social isolation has been determined to be the health risk equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So we know that it does have a significant impact on our physical health as well as our emotional health as well. Sadly, dementia is becoming a new normal. Worldwide, currently there are around 50 million people who have dementia, and there are nearly 10 million new cases every year. That information comes from the World Health Organization. Currently, there is no cure, but at TimeSlips we like to focus on what we can do in the face of such kind of staggering statistics, right? And think about hope in prevention, delaying symptoms as long as possible, perhaps through diet, education, exercise, meaningful social networks. And something that we definitely focused a lot on at TimeSlips is providing all older adults, regardless of their cognitive ability, a sense of meaning and purpose. So moving on again to our creative engagement in 4 easy steps. Our first step is going to be lean into your creativity. So in a moment, we're going to have a little bit more of a conversation about what exactly it means to be creative, and maybe unpack a little bit of baggage that we may have about the words creativity and being an artist. After that, we'll move into step 2, which is looking how we can use creativity as a way to create meaningful moments with those we're caring for. Then we'll talk about practicing the shift away from using memory as a way, shared memories as a way to connect, moving towards using imagination and creativity as a way to connect. And then finally, we'll talk about ways that you can be part of what we at TimeSlips call the creative care revolution. So first of all, again, step 1 being lean into your creativity. You're going to see a few of the little characters that you saw in the video a little bit early popping up in our the presentation here. So you heard in the video, right, that often in situations where if you were engaging with a friend or a family member and somebody might struggle to remember information that is perhaps we would expect to be kind of right on the tip of the tongue, right? The name for an object like a pen or a pencil, right? The name of a close friend or family member, right? In those moments, it might be sort of our first impulse is to maybe correct them, or if we see that someone's kind of struggling with, at that moment, maybe distracting them. Often we might try to like connect and have a conversation with a friend or family member by talking about shared memories and saying something like, remember that time you went to Disneyland on vacation, right? And again, while it's perfectly natural to want to use shared memories and experience as a way to connect with those that we love, as I'm sure many of you know, if you are somebody that struggles to remember those things or those memories that are clearly very important to people in our family, that might cause someone to kind of like maybe want to shut down or be a little more reluctant to engage in future conversations, right? And if people can't respond to a question or an answer that we expect, the response should be right there at the tip of their tongue. They might feel kind of ashamed or embarrassed about that experience. So again, at TimeSlips, we encourage people, when you find yourselves in those situations, again, rather than trying kind of going to that default position of using shared memories as a way to connect, is to try a different approach, right? And to use creativity as a way to shift to that freedom that we can find in using imagination as a way to connect. So little moment for interaction here. You can do this in a couple different ways. In the chat, you can respond, or if you are familiar with how Zoom works, and you can do the little kind of emoji responses with like a thumbs up in your screen. I'm curious how many of you would consider yourself a creative person, right? You can give me a thumbs up on your screen, or you can respond in the chat. Justine says yes, with an exclamation point. So I felt that enthusiasm there. Yeah. I see a thumbs up from Kathleen on the screen too. Great. Can't see everybody's screen right now. Alison gave me a thumbs up as well. Thank you. I also do some after school programming on Zoom right now, and I've been experimenting a little bit more to show you an example again of like other ways to be creative, right? Of using the different kind of emoji responses in Zoom. And even if you know, like there's little filters you can do where you can put on like little silly hats and stuff. So that's one example, right, of using Zoom creatively, right, as a way to kind of be a little bit more engaging on camera. And Russ, you raised your hand. Did you are you asking a question, or are you just saying like raising your hand in response to being a creative person?
Sorry, I'm experimenting with the emojis.
Got it. Love it. Thank you. Great. Well, I'm glad to hear that some people were very happy to call themselves a creative person and to own that. Know that if maybe when I asked that question, you were a little kind of like reluctant to respond, or like maybe like, I don't know if maybe I'm a creative person or not. Know that is more often than not the common response that I hear from folks. And I think one of the reasons that happens is because so many of us think that to be a creative individual, you have to be an artist of some kind, right? And some of us in this room might be artists or may have a kind of creative practice in some way. But creativity is so much more than being an artist, and so much more than painting, singing, writing, drawing, whatever. Creativity is an innate human characteristic, right? So we often say at TimeSlips that if you can breathe, you can create. And a way that we sort of help people maybe expand their understanding or definition of creativity is maybe to think about how are some ways that we are creative in our everyday lives, right? So some common examples that I often share are that perhaps you might have like a fully stocked pantry or fridge or freezer in your home, and maybe you find yourself in a situation one night where it's like, oh, I've got to make dinner for for the family or for my partner and I, and I don't know what to make, right? You don't have a sort of plan, right? Maybe just looking at what ingredients you have in the pantry or the in the home, and like what can you make with what you have available, right? There's immense creativity in sort of like cooking something from scratch, right? Whether you follow a recipe or not. Other ways that I think we can be creative in maybe unexpected ways. Maybe you're a very thoughtful gift giver, right? When it comes to someone's birthday or any occasion to give them a gift, like you really think intentionally about what you can give them as a gift. I think there's an immense creativity in like a well-balanced budget, right? And spreadsheets, right? Even though like that is like folks very much in the world of like numbers and mathematics, right? It takes a lot of creativity to make sure that like, everything balances out correctly. And I know that when I'm kind of doing that side of my work as a sort of freelance artist and budgeting for the projects I'm working on, I get great satisfaction from when everything sort of aligns correctly and like the math happens, right? So many other examples of how we can all be creative in our everyday lives. But also another definition that we like to share often at TimeSlips is that it comes from a gentleman called Gene Cohen, who says that creativity is adding something new to the world that has value. So hopefully when you hear that expression of creativity, it will maybe help you understand a little bit more that creativity does not need to be limited just to being an artist. I think definitely too. Thank you, Russ. Yes, the biggest creative moments for me, for you, come from the universe. Thank you. But I also like to, when I'm in a room of predominantly caregivers, acknowledge the fact that caregiving in itself is definitely adding something to the world that has value, yeah, but also requires you to probably be creative in many, many ways on a daily basis, having to kind of, you know, meet with, sort of deal with whatever situation may arise in a day, right, with the person that you're caring with or caring for. So knowing that, again, if you were a little bit reluctant to call yourself a creative person at the beginning of this little conversation, I hope by now you're feeling a little bit more proud of your creativity as well. So a couple of ways that TimeSlips use creativity, especially in terms of our creative engagements. There's kind of two core concepts we're going to talk about today. The first is yes and yes and is essentially the golden rule of improvisation. So those of you that were with us at the beginning of the presentation heard that my background is in kind of theatre and performance. And Anne Basting, who founded TimeSlips as an organization over 25 years ago, also has quite a similar background to myself. That's how she and I connected first and how I was able to join this organization. And so if anybody's ever done any kind of improv performance work, or maybe watched a live performance or television shows where that kind of improv is the focus, a famous one, I'm not sure if it's still on, but I know it repeats are on quite often, is Whose Line Is It Anyway? We have a group of actors or performers who are kind of given suggestions from the audience for like a setting for a scene or different types of characters, and they just kind of accept all those responses and they create a performance right there and then based on that, right? So in the world of improv, right, yes and is essential, because whatever suggestions you were given, or if I was to be performing a scene right with you with somebody else right now, if I asked for a suggestion from the audience and I didn't like that suggestion and I said, oh no, that's a terrible idea, that's not practicing yes and, right? That's very clearly saying no, bad idea, right? So in the world of improvisation and storytelling, yes and makes a lot of sense, right? Because it just it helps us to kind of build from what anyone else is giving you. But in the world of healthcare, it's quite a radical thought, because what it's asking you to do is respond to the person that you're caring for exactly as they are in that moment, who they are now, not the person that they used to be. And we know that that's particularly challenging for people who are caring for family members when you have a long sort of existing history and relation with that person, to kind of have to, in that moment, sort of like put that aside and meet that person exactly as they are in that moment. Yep. So yes, and we'll talk about this. We'll get to practice this in a little moment. And the other core concept we want to talk about today is the act of asking beautiful questions. So at the start of this presentation too, if you're just joining us now, I asked an example of a beautiful question, which was, how do you greet someone you love? So beautiful question is simply one that opens up a shared path of discovery. It's an open-ended question, so it cannot be, it's not a simple yes or no response question, right? It has no right or wrong answer. Whatever feels like the right answer to you in that moment is the right answer, yeah? So we had quite a few similar responses to that question, how do you greet someone you love, right? But all of those came from the individual, and that was their response to that question, right? So questions themselves, beautiful questions, can be simple ways of maybe reframing a conversation or starting a conversation. They can sometimes result in quite profound responses as well. And you're going to see and hear some examples of those a little bit later on in our presentation. So again, going back to this idea of creative engagement, at TimeSlips we combine those techniques of yes and beautiful questions in an activity that we call creative storytelling. So if you are familiar with TimeSlips, you may have seen this before, maybe you've been able to experience this yourself. If not, don't worry, because we're going to do the virtual version of creative storytelling in a moment here. So we use a variety of different prompts to engage people in creative conversations and imagine stories together. And one of the sort of classic ways we do that is by using image prompts, primarily photographs, but often we may use paintings, drawings, other things as well. If those of you have used TimeSlips before will know on our website, we have a whole sort of library of images that we've sort of curated that we think are really helpful for this type of activity. And the image that you're going to see in a moment too is one of those. So in a moment, we're going to practice the concept of yes and responding to beautiful questions. I'm going to ask you a series of beautiful questions and you can respond in the chat. And we're going to imagine a story together for the image that is now on your screen. So just in case there's anyone who is maybe like joining us on a phone, or maybe like what you're seeing on screen is a little bit different, or perhaps there's somebody in the group that may be living with some kind of visual impairments. The image that you have on the screen in front of you is a black and white photograph of two penguins. They're standing kind of quite close to each other with their beaks just a little bit apart on a pebble beach, and it looks like maybe there's a little bit of ice and maybe some snow-capped mountains in the distance. So just gave a little bit of a visual description there, so that even if we were doing this with somebody who was unable to see this image, right? Hopefully they could imagine, you know, a version of this image in their mind and might still be able to respond and join in this activity, right? So, so now I'm going to ask a series of beautiful questions. So as I'm asking these questions, keep a listen out to the fact that they'll all be those sort of open-ended style questions. And then I would love to get your responses in the chat. Now I know we've got, trying to see how many people we've got in the, okay, so we've got 16 folks here now, so that's a great number for this activity. Don't worry if, you know, somebody responds to a question with a different response than you. In this creative storytelling exercise, we're going to accept and affirm all answers, and I'm going to do my best to echo them as they come in, and I'll read them out from the chat. So once again, I'm going to ask you a series of beautiful questions for the image that's on our screen, and you can respond to those questions in the chat. So to begin with, I'm going to start off with the question, what should we say is happening here? What should we say is happening in this image? I'm going to type them in the chat too so you can read them. What would you like to say is happening in this image? All right, so Nell started us off by saying we have some friends meeting. Thank you, Nell. Russ says there's penguins talking about global warming. And Kathleen says, oh, maybe they're saying, hello, nice to meet you. Heather says it's a standoff of alphas. Great responses so far. Brigitte says, two penguins are on a date. And Allison says maybe it's a husband and a wife reuniting after a hunt. Fantastic. Some great responses so far as to what we think is happening here. I wonder, oh, and maybe one of them is thinking, or Allison says she's been watching too much Planet Earth. Thank you. Love it. Sandra says hubby and wife are talking what to do next. Great. All right, well, we've already assigned like some possible kind of social roles or relationships to these penguins, right? I wonder if we gave them names, what could we call our penguins? What would we like to call our penguins? So Sandra says, Brett and Mary. Thank you, Sandra. Sasha and Bernard. Great responses so far. Salt and pepper. Like that? All right, so our penguins could be called Brett and Mary, maybe Sasha, Bernard, or Salt and Pepper. We heard some folks thinking that maybe they could be husband and wife, or maybe they're two alphas kind of squaring off. Cookie and Milk might be another good name for them. Thank you, Allison. All right, so we've set the scene for our story about what we think is happening, what our penguins might be called. Justine says they might be called Squeaky and Giggles. Love that. I wonder, where in the world do you think we might be right now? Where in the world might we find these penguins? All right, Russ says we're in Greenland. Nell says maybe at the zoo. You got your responses in there a little bit before I could ask the question, but that's fine. Ellen says maybe we're on an iceberg. Thank you, Ellen. So we might be in Greenland or maybe at the zoo, perhaps even on an iceberg. And I wonder what sounds do we imagine might be in this image? What sounds? Or might we hear in this moment? What sounds might we or our penguins hear? We could hear maybe the sound of seagulls. Now, if I was doing this as a in-person storytelling session, I might ask, well, what does a seagull sound like, right? And I will trust, I'll let you decide if you want to. If you want to make the sound of a seagull at home right now, you can do that. You can keep yourself muted if you'd rather not, be heard. But we can imagine what the sound of seagulls might sound like. Kathleen says we can hear the cold wind blowing. Wow. Thank you, Kathleen. So we can hear the sound of seagulls, the sound of the cold wind blowing. Anything else? What else might we hear in this moment? Maybe there's other penguins chatting. Thank you, Allison. All right, this is sometimes a fun question. I wonder what smells might be in this moment. What might our penguins smell around them? They can hear seagulls and the cold wind blowing and maybe other penguins chattering. I wonder what they can smell. Oh, Bridget says they can smell the fresh, cold air. I've been smelling a lot of that lately. It's got very chilly here in Detroit. Salt water, thank you. The salty sea, says Josh. What smells might be in this moment? Great responses, everyone, so far. Snowy air, thank you. The smell of fish. To be more specific, dead fish. All right, now we're getting a little, not the nicest smells, perhaps, right? Great responses. Let's do a couple more questions here. I wonder, what might our penguins dream of? What might these penguins dream of? Or dream about? Well, they dream of swimming or their next meal. Thank you, Ellen Russ. They're dreaming of fish and food and adventure. Great dreams. I have a lot of dreams about food, just like our penguins. All right. Well, maybe dreaming of a new season. Thank you, Mary. All right, and here's maybe one more question to sort of end this little activity. Kathleen says they dream of a fish dinner. I wonder what might happen next. What might happen next for our two penguins? Oh, next, Mary says they're going to sleep. Or they might even kiss. Nell says they're going to jump in the water. Russ says they're going to go off hunting dinner. Fantastic. All great responses, everyone. Thank you so much. We are going to kind of bring the storytelling activity to a close for a moment. But as we continue, hopefully there in that little exercise, you got a little bit of a demonstration or a sense of how, again, at TimeSlips we use those concepts of yes and beautiful questions in to kind of create that moment together. I know doing it on Zoom is not ideal, right? But I hope at least that gave you a little bit of a sense of how this technique works. And whenever we're sort of introducing our techniques to a new audience, we'd love to let people be kind of involved in the activities themselves, particularly if they're going to be people that are maybe going to try and lead this themselves. I think it's a great thing to be a part of. So I hope that you found that a helpful and fun exercise as well. And just a couple of sort of like further comments now on what we did in that exercise together. So again, I asked every question there that I asked of the group here was an open-ended question, right? I didn't ask any questions that had a very definitive answer or a yes or no question, right? You can see by the variety of responses that we had in the chat that we all kind of responded, many of us respond to those questions in different ways, right? I tried to read back and echo all of the responses that came in on chat. I'll admit it's a little easier to do this type of activity on Zoom when I can read the comments. If I was doing this in a kind of large group setting, and if it's a really big group and they get very sort of energetic and are eager to respond, trying to like write down all the responses as they come in and read them gets quite difficult. I apologize too that my light just went out and it's been my light has been playing up a little bit lately. So if it goes off again, I might be a little bit darker on my screen. I apologize. but hopefully you can still hear me okay. In that exercise too, right, I asked a lot of questions about kind of sensory experiences, sounds and smells. There it goes again. My light might just not want to cooperate today. Let's see if that's a little bit better. There was one moment though where I asked about the kind of what sounds we might hear, right? And we heard suggestions of the sounds of seagulls, right? The sounds of the billowing air, right? So in those moments too, right? I offered examples of, you could ask, I wonder what might the seagull sound like, or if I was to go even further, I might say, can we make a gesture of like what the seagulls flying above look like, and maybe people could respond, you know, with a movement, right? So even if you're doing this work with people that are beyond words, they might be able to respond with a gesture or a sound. And usually what we do when we would do this kind of activity together with a group of any size is once we've collected all the responses, we read the story back to everyone together so they can hear their own creativity kind of performed or told back to them. So I'm going to go back to the image for a second here. And I'm going to read us our story now from start to end with all the responses that you gave me in the chat. We didn't give a title for the story either. So as I'm reading it this time, if anybody comes up with, you know, a good title, let me know. We can maybe give it a title at the end. So here we go. I'm just scrolling back through all of our wonderful responses. So here we go. The start of our story. We said that we have two friends meeting. It's penguins talking about global warming. Maybe they're saying, hello, nice to meet you. Heather said it's the standoff of alphas. Or it's two penguins on a date. Maybe it's a husband and a wife reuniting after a hunt. Allison said that, thinking that maybe she's been watching too much Planet Earth. Sandra says maybe it's a hubby and wife and they're talking about what to do next. We decided that our penguins might be called Brett and Mary, Sasha and Bernard, Salt and Pepper, or maybe Cookie and Milk, even Squeaky and Giggles. We might be in Greenland, or maybe at the zoo. We could be on an iceberg. And in this moment, we can hear the sound of seagulls, and you can join in with the sound of seagulls at home if you would like. The cold wind blowing, the sound of other penguins chatting, and we can smell the fresh, cold air, salt water, the salty sea. We can smell the snowy air, fish, dead fish. Our penguins are dreaming of swimming, or maybe their next meal, which could be fish or any food. They're dreaming of adventure, new seasons, and a fish dinner. Next in our story, our penguins might sleep, or they might kiss. They may jump in the water and go off hunting dinner. And there's our story. All right, so you can give yourselves a round of applause, virtually or at home, however you choose. Anybody got a suggestion for a title for that story? You can throw it in the chat. Any suggestions for a title for that story? Yes, Russ. Do you have a suggestion for the title, Russ, or are we just applauding the creativity of our group? All right, well, if anyone comes up with the title, you can throw it in the chat later on. Oh, thank you, Mary. Love on a Quiet Afternoon. Lovely title, thank you. All right, well, that was an example of our creativity, right? Even though we're all kind of joining together in this virtual space from different places, right? Different states. We were able to kind of use creativity as a way to connect and create something together, right? So quite often in those, and again, in that activity, as I just mentioned, we practice using those core concepts of time slips, asking beautiful questions and responding with yes and hopefully you caught on to that I was kind of modeling a very kind of similar behavior each time that I saw a new response in the chat, which was echoing that response, repeating it back verbatim, both as a way to make sure that each suggestion was like, validated, but also it's a great way to just make sure that if we were doing this in real time and you were responding audibly, to make sure that I heard it correctly, right? It's a little bit easier when I can read them. But if you offer a suggestion in a group in real time, it's always great to sort of hear that suggestion repeated back to you to know that you were heard and you were seen, right? So quite often when doing this activity with people that are new to it for the first time, the common response we get is that like, oh, that was kind of fun, or a nice little kind of, creative exercise, a good exercise for the brain. But people might say like, but does it really work with people living with dementia? Maybe people in quite advanced stages of the disease? And our response is yes, with a little bit of a caveat, right? That we know that everybody is different, and TimeSlips, our techniques are not a one-size-fits-all kind of treatment, right? But to show you the potential that this kind of work can have with people living with memory loss, I am going to read to you now another story that was created with a group in the Detroit area that I facilitated a session with a few years ago now. It was before the pandemic, and sadly since then, I know that many of the members of this group have passed. But I have to say that this is one of my favorite stories, and every time I get to share it with a new group of people, I think it's a lovely testament and reminder to the power of kind of creativity in people that we might often think are unable to offer that to the world. But also it remains as a beautiful gift, even of people that are no longer with us, right? They left this story behind, and we still get to enjoy it and share in their creativity too. So they called their story Him and Her. And it goes like this. It's really nice. He is saying, do you want to go down to the water? He's going to stay with her every day, probably. Maybe they are looking at the stars and they are in awe. And one has their feet in the water, just dipping their toes. We're just going to leave them alone as they look so peaceful. If there are people there, they need to be on the lookout. They're not going anywhere. They'll be there together for a long time. They look peaceful. They might say, let's stay together. It might be Alaska or even at the Detroit Zoo. Maybe they snuck out from the zoo and one said, we made it. They will stand there looking at the water and will be peaceful until someone comes looking for them. Maybe, perhaps there's a message scratched in the snow, and the message says, stay here forever and ever. Amen. So there you go. Beautiful story. Quite a different type of story in terms of its tone than what we created. And not to say that one is better than the other, right? But I love to share this story with people, as I think it serves as a wonderful example, again, of the kind of poetic, sort of profound responses that can often come out of this work, right? Every time I read this story and I read that line about the message scratched in the snow and the idea of like penguins looking at the stars and them being in awe, I'm reminded of what a beautiful sort of gift it was to receive this story and to still be able to share this story with others now. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed that story too. The beautiful questions that we used in that activity and that I asked at the beginning of this session today can be used as a great prompt in themselves. You don't always have to use creative engagement techniques to create stories together, right? You can just use questions as a way, beautiful questions as a way to have any kind of different conversation. And we have a lot more information on our website about how you can use beautiful questions as a great way to connect with people, friends, loved ones, from a distance, whether it's talking over the telephone, writing postcards or letters using beautiful questions as well. And we're gonna do another little bit of a practice demonstration of creative engagement in a moment, because over the last couple of years, particularly as more of us have been separate from loved ones and family members, we've been doing a lot more work at TimeSlips to focus on encouraging people to use our creative engagement perhaps over the phone or in other kind of remote ways. So one way that we do that is by encouraging people to simply, call somebody, whether it's a family member or anyone that you know maybe in your life or community that might be kind of living alone and would appreciate like a friendly call. And maybe so you, rather than kind of just calling someone and like talking about like, how their day's going or whatever, asking them some of our beautiful questions that might kind of lead them on a little bit more of a creative conversation. And Karen, I saw your question there about how to do this with the visually impaired. I think this serves as a great example, right? Because all of this happens over the phone. So we're just focusing on our voices now. Obviously, this does require people that can respond audibly, right? And so we're going to do, I'm going to do a little bit of a demonstration in a moment, then you're going to hear an example. And I will say that quite often our telephone engagement works better with people that may If there is some memory loss there, maybe it's not as profound, perhaps, as others. But it is helpful, definitely for people, even if there's no sort of cognitive decline. Anybody who's experiencing loneliness or isolation can really benefit from this type of engagement. The only things that are maybe a little bit different though when you're just doing this over the phone is that you definitely have to be a little bit more aware of what you're saying and how you're saying it, because you're not able to get the kind of visual clues that you might get by asking these questions of somebody in person, right? We, in our demonstration of doing the storytelling session in chat, there was a little bit of a silence, right? There was a little bit of kind of people kind of waiting to respond, right? But often if you're doing this this work in person or even over the phone, silence doesn't mean that people aren't interested, right? Depending on someone's cognitive ability, it may take them a few moments to sort of like, you know, formulate a response. So being okay to sort of sit with silence, being okay with that kind of repeating a question maybe once or twice to help someone kind of prompt them along again. And again, providing positive reinforcements and reminders throughout the, you know, the time that there are no wrong answers. I was doing a little bit of that in our storytelling session, right? Most of you all had, you know, a lot of responses and were not shy about them, but if maybe people were a little bit more reluctant, I was repeating the questions a few times, but I might sort of add in a few, you know, don't worry, you know, you can say whatever you want in this story. There's no wrong answers. We're just making this up, right? Quite often doing this work, people might respond with, I don't know, and just say that, you know, over and over again. And we can even respond, we can even practice yes and when people respond with a don't know by saying, you know what, it's okay, I don't know either. We're just making it up. So we can say whatever we want, right? So again, those kind of positive reinforcements might bring somebody out of their shell a little bit more. And once again, those core concepts of time slips really can be a wonderful way to help shape a conversation that happens just over the phone, asking a beautiful question, echoing and affirming that response with yes and then building on the conversation by adding a new question. So we're going to do a little bit of a demonstration now of a creative interaction that may happen over the phone. And so for this, I will turn my video off, so you will just hear my voice at this point. And I don't remember who it was that said earlier they would be happy to volunteer. It was our TimeSlips facilitator. If you are still there and you would like to unmute yourself, I'd love to have a little bit of a creative conversation with you. It was Justine, wasn't it? Yes, Justine, if you'd like to just unmute yourself and introduce yourself, say hello so we can hear you.
Hello, it's Justine. Hello,
Hi,
everybody.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead here and turn my camera off for a moment as well. Just so you can just hear us. So in this moment, it's a great opportunity just to imagine that Justine and I are having a creative conversation over the phone, right? You can even close your eyes at home if you'd like to, just to help you imagine that. And this is just, again, as another way to kind of demonstrate one of the ways that we can adapt our creative engagement techniques to connect with people even at a distance, right? So, so Justine, it's so nice to speak to you today. Can you let me know where you joining, where are you calling from today?
I'm in Philadelphia.
All right, and how are things in Philadelphia today?
Good, they're chilly.
Chilly.
Cold.
It's chilly.
Yes.
It's cold here too. Yes, I think
Yes.
the chilly season has arrived. Well, I'm so happy to have this conversation with you today. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you what we at TimeSlips call a beautiful question. I'll maybe ask you a couple of different beautiful questions. We call these beautiful questions because they are open-ended questions that you can answer however you want, and maybe in that, you know, you'll provide us with a beautiful response as well. You can say whatever you want to these questions. Again, there's no right or wrong answers. And do you have any questions for me before we start?
No, thanks. No.
Okay. Well, I heard you say that it's quite a chilly day in Philadelphia right now. So I wonder if you had the ability to fly, if you clap your wings and fly off to anywhere else in the world, where might you want to go to?
Oh, I think I would fly all the way to London.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know London well. And what would you do when you get to London?
I would land in North Finchley in my family's back garden and surprise them.
Oh, wow. That would be a great surprise. Well, I wonder, what would you do and what would you say to surprise your family when you arrive in their back garden?
Oh, I think, Well, I wouldn't be escaping the weather, obviously. I think it's probably chilly there too. I think I would, kind of tap on their kitchen window and just surprise them through the window.
All right. So
Hi, hello, look who's here.
awesome. So if you could fly anywhere, you'd fly all the way from Philadelphia across the ocean to London to North Finchley. You'd surprise your family. They go and you tap on the window, the kitchen window, and say, "Hi, it's me."
Yeah, here I am
love that.
finally.
I love that. But then what would be the first thing you would do together when you're back in London with family?
Well, after a lot of hugging and kissing and enthusiastic greetings, we probably would just sit around the kitchen table and have conversations and catch up and eat some delicious Hungarian food.
Oh, nice.
And see all my cousins and people I've been so far apart from for so long because of COVID.
Yeah.
It'd be a lovely reunion to see them all. There are many, many people in London who I would want to see, like maybe 35 people.
Wow.
So
well, that was beautiful. Thank you. I lived in London for many years myself, so that little journey that you took me on too, like just to making me think about, like, I would happily join you on that imaginary flight back to London. There's a lot of
we can fly together.
I would love to see, and lots of food I would love to eat as well.
Cup of tea.
Yes, I had several this morning already.
Yes.
Well, I could maybe ask you one more beautiful question if you don't mind.
Sure.
Bit of a different question now. I wonder if what gift would you give to the next generation? If you could give the next generation of people in your life or the world any gift, what would you give them?
I do have 2 kids, so it's I think the gift of kindness and compassion. I feel like they go together. I think we need more kindness in the world. And I think that will then affect not only our, relationships with friends and family, but with neighbors and community and the world and the environment. And I think it really affects everything and everybody. Kindness. That's what I would do.
Beautiful. Thank you. Wonderful gift. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for your responses and being willing to have this little creative conversation with me. I hope that even though I can't see you and we're separated from many miles, I feel like I got to know you a little bit better there in that conversation and learn some new things about you. And I agree. I think sharing kindness as a gift to the world is something that we definitely need a lot more of. So thank you.
Thank you. That was fun.
Well, there we go. We can end our little demonstration there. I'll turn my camera back on so you can see my face again. So there you go. Just a little bit of an example too of a different type of creative engagement. So no image prompts there, right? We just use the questions. But even as with those 2 questions that I asked, right, we got to go on quite a imaginative journey, right? I'm sure you were all probably imagining what the back garden in Justine's family's home in North Finchley, London looks like, right? I could imagine that big table of Hungarian food, a nice spread for the entire family. So again, just one example of ways you can connect and have a different type of conversation, right? By starting with some of these beautiful questions. We're going to hear another example of a creative engagement that happens over the phone in this video in a moment. So some of you that are familiar with TimeSlips may know that we also do a program called Telestories, which is essentially creative engagement over the phone, where we often work with artists in one particular sort of city. So we've done this project right now in Milwaukee and Detroit, currently sort of in the process of bringing it to some communities in Western New York. And we're hoping that this could be a project that spreads to cities kind of all across the country and world, as it's a really simple but lovely program. Essentially what we do is we train local artists in our creative engagement techniques, and then we match them with an aging services organization that might do some kind of friendly caller program or use a phone reassurance program just to connect with isolated older adults in their community. And artists lead those, are paired with those adults and lead a series of creative conversations over anywhere from like 6 to 8 weeks. And then at the end of that program, each artist creates some sort of artistic gift for each of their callers that is in some way a representation of the conversations that they've had. So you're going to hear an example of another creative conversation now. And the artist that created this is a good friend of mine, Shireen Azab. She's a director and writer and co-director of a theater company that we worked with, particularly on the Telestories Detroit project. And she created a stop motion animation video for the phone conversations she had. And in this video, you're going to hear a few of the other beautiful questions that can be asked over the phone. And then you're going to see the beautiful little animation that Shireen made to accompany it. So here we go.
I would like to be a shapeshifter because for the simple reason with a shapeshifter, you can be just about anything. You can fly like a bumblebee, and you can make yourself really, really, really tiny. To me, that would cover the invisibility, so tiny. And you could be the fly on the wall, whatever. I mean, there's so many shapes that you could turn into. I think I would fly as a hawk or an eagle. No, at first it wouldn't be a destination. It would just, have you ever looked up in the sky and just seen a hawk? And you see them swerving and going in and out. And then sometimes you see them even diving. So I wouldn't have a destination at first. I would just fly and look down at the earth. I would start with an ant. They are so amazing because not only can they lift a whole lot of different things, but they have a community. They socialize. I mean, they even have wars. A whale. The whale is a huge, beautiful animal, or mammal. It is gorgeous. I've always admired the whales because I wouldn't want a tiger or a lion or nothing like that, or even a bear. And if we would be friends, and I think I would even be able to go in his mouth, and I would go for rides with him and meet her children. I'd be part of the family. And I would love to be able to sing like a whale too. Hope feels like happiness. If I have joy in my heart and I'm happy, that's hope. Hope is knowing that people is there that got your back. We don't have hope. We don't have anything. I mean, because hope gives us the ability to look and see. Years ago, I do mean years ago, I had this dream where everything, the Lord showed me everything was black. Everything was black. And way, way, way off way off, I could see one little, like a pinprick of light. But when I looked and I saw that was my hope. My hope was there. And a lot of times, even now, I go back and I remember that pin. And to me, it's gotten bigger. I'm getting closer to it. That's my hope. That light is my hope. Hope and infinity should be intertwined. My children makes me hopeful. I guess you could say my family is my legacy.
So there we go. A beautiful gift from Jessica in Detroit, and video created by Shireen, the artist working with her as part of our Telestories project. One of the things that we love about that program is that not only is it providing a great service to older adults in the community that are isolated and maybe don't get many opportunities to engage or sort of visit with folks. It's also the artists that work on that project were paid. And often when we do this project, we always hear from the artists too of what a meaningful experience it is for them. And particularly in the time that we're living in right now, where we worked with a theater company who have not been able to create and perform together for going on a couple of years now, and providing them with an opportunity to do something else kind of creative and to use their skills in a way to, to connect with others in their community. And also, as many of the artists in this particular project were in their sort of 20s to 30s, hearing their sort of changing perceptions and attitudes towards aging and older adults too. Many of them it really changed them and made them think a lot about, the way that we often don't value the role and creativity, right, of older adults in the world. So a lovely, lovely project, Telestories. Again, we've done it in a few different cities and hoping to bring it to more places soon. Moving on though in our program, moving into step 2 of our 4 steps for creative engagement, which is now to create meaningful moments. So hopefully in that video you just heard what a meaningful moment that was, both for the artist and the caller, but also those of us that got to hear it afterwards. When we do our creative engagement techniques, quite often it may be sort of structured or sort of set up as quite a bit of a special event, right? If I'm going to go to a memory care community and facilitate a TimeSlips story, it's something that's on the calendar. It's an event that, as I arrive, I greet all of the storytellers together. I will ask a couple of beautiful questions. We'll get some images out. We'll create stories together. I'll read them back and we'll laugh and celebrate together. And that's great, right? The phone calls too is a good example of most of those phone calls happen at a regular time each week. So each older adult participating knew that on a Wednesday at 3 o'clock they were going to get their creative phone call. So it was something planned and expected, and hopefully something that they looked forward to, right? But our techniques don't always have to be used in that way. They can also be used in any kind of sort of moment, everyday situation, right? So whether it's a special event or any sort of moment that just strikes you where you need to kind of inject a little bit of creativity into the moment, the steps to do this work again are very simple. In the beginnings, you can invite that person into the moment with you. So as I demonstrated with Justine earlier, sort of explained in very clear terms, I'm going to ask you a series of beautiful questions. What is a beautiful question? I explained. Then I asked a couple of beautiful questions, got the responses from Justine, echoed what I heard to again offer proof of listening and to affirm those responses. And then you probably heard in that moment too, I asked a couple of other questions built off that response, right? So accepting those responses with yes and building off asking a new question in response to it. So again, the techniques, those simple steps can be used for both the special events, creative engagement exercise, or any type of everyday moments. So to think about how we might apply our techniques to everyday situations that we might encounter if we're caring for somebody living with memory loss, we're going to look at just a couple of examples now, 2 scenarios that we've heard from caregivers like you, with examples of if you find yourself in a similar experience, here's an example of how you could respond with a beautiful question, or you could respond with yes and a beautiful question. So our first scenario is, it's called Can You Pass the... And so imagine for a moment that you're having lunch with a friend and they struggle to remember the name for ketchup. In that moment, you could offer them the ketchup and say, do you mean ketchup, right? You could give them the word for that object, or instead, you could, if you notice that they're kind of struggling to remember that word or that name, you could simply ask a beautiful question like, well, what do you want to call it? Let's say in that moment, the person is unable to say ketchup, but they can say red bottle, right? Well, then you can say, okay, red bottle, here's the red bottle. Very simple scenario there. I'm sure you can imagine multiple different versions of that over dinner or other sort of conversations where, again, in that moment, a word, the name for an everyday object may be, lost to someone. So in that moment, asking them what did they want to call it is a different way, right, of engaging and connecting with them. And if we can give something a new name, right, we can take it from there, right? Again, knowing that the impulse to sort of correct or give somebody the name, answer the question for them, maybe coming from a place of kindness, and we see that person struggling, we want to help them out of that situation. Think back to what we said earlier in our presentation, that often, if that happens quite often in someone's day, being kind of corrected or sort of given the word for something might make them feel a little ashamed or embarrassed about what's happening in their life, right? So again, asking them, empowering them to give something a new name is a way to help them sort of stay more engaged in a conversation, right? So another example, this one called My Foot Hurts. Imagine that you're visiting a loved one and they keep telling you that their foot hurts. Maybe in that moment, you might want to distract them by talking about the weather or something else, but instead, maybe you could ask a beautiful question like, if your foot could talk, I wonder what it would say. Let's say the person responds with, I'm tired, right? you can respond, you can echo that back and say, I'm tired, and maybe follow up with a question like, okay, well, what can we do to wake your feet up, right? So another simple example there, right? This one actually came to us from physical therapists who use TimeSlips techniques as a way to kind of be more inclusive and supportive if they're caring for patients living with dementia. And so while that's a fun kind of creative opportunity for a conversation there about if your feet could talk what they say, it also might actually get us to like the root of a problem, right? If somebody's feeling some pain in their body, right? Being able to say like, well, if you could, if your arm could speak, and like, what might they say, might actually get us to find a way to provide some care or comfort to that person in that moment. So there you go, 2 simple examples there of everyday kind of common situations where you may not be planning to have a creative conversation, but if you're trying to connect or communicate with somebody where there may be challenges in communication, asking a beautiful question can be a different way of kind of connecting and engaging with them. So moving into step 3 of our program, shifting from memory to imagination. Now I've shown you, we've experienced a few different ways that we can use creative engagement as a way to shift from memory to imagination. But we know again that it's a natural impulse to use fact and memory as a way to connect and kind of relate to one another. So we like to let folks know that if you're new to our work and you're interested in sort of trying it out, it is something that takes a little bit of practice, right? And learning to kind of reframe like the way that you ask questions and the way that you approach somebody can take time. But we hope that if you are willing to give it a try and say yes and, right, to whatever situation the world throws you, you might feel joy and connection in a way that you haven't felt in a while. We know particularly for family members caring with a loved one living with dementia, it often is a very thankless task. If the burden of care falls primarily on you and not other family members, right? It's not often it's not a very joyful experience, right? And we hope that our techniques might bring a little bit of joy and connection kind of back into those everyday moments. But we know too that all of you are an important part of ending the isolation and loneliness that can wrap itself around anybody in late life, especially those people experiencing dementia. So finally, our last step is a little bit of a call to action, where we encourage you to join what we at TimeSlips call our creative care revolution. And there are many ways in which you can do this. So we call this approach to creative engagement creative care, right? And creative care is a simple way to engage older friends and loved ones who might have memory challenges, and again, even those who don't. At its core, it's a simple invitation to imagine something together, a shared moment of creation, again, without that pressure to always have a right or wrong answer. So if you'd like to learn more about TimeSlips as an organization and the other services we provide, our website is timeslips.org. On our website, we have a free online creativity center that includes many of the image prompts that I mentioned earlier that you can print off and use. You can also learn more. We have people using our techniques all over the world in many different countries, and both artists, caregivers, healthcare workers, all sort of united with that goal to bring meaning and joy into the lives of elders. We have other resources available too, including a free online training especially designed for family and friend caregivers. And we have a new resource that we also just released this year called the Creative Care Imagination Kit. So I'm going to take a little bit of a moment just to talk a little bit more about some of these resources, some of which are free and others that which are available to you at hopefully not too much of cost. To begin with, though, one thing I definitely want to give a plug for is our free online friends and family training. So this is essentially an online module that covers many of the same things that we've done in our engagement party today. It's a 45-minute module where you can watch it online. It's free for anybody. You just have to have an account on our TimeSlips website to watch. And if you don't have one, if you try to click on the link to watch the training, it will prompt you to watch that. So that could be a great sort of follow-up to this experience if you'd like to learn a little bit more about TimeSlips. Or if you know anyone in your life that you think would really benefit from this, you can simply send them an email and say, hey, check out this training. It's free. It's only 45 minutes. We know too, for family caregivers, that like even getting 45 minutes out of your day is maybe a challenge, right? But other training is a little bit more robust and takes more time. And we hope that something that's a little bit more shorter and easy to digest might be something that you can easily share with anybody that you think might benefit from that. What we're experiencing today is the virtual version of our TimeSlips Engagement Party, right? But we also encourage people, anybody who wants to bring TimeSlips to people in their lives, whether it's family members, let's say you're part of a faith community, and you know that there are people within your community that are caring for people living with memory loss, and you want to share TimeSlips with them, you can throw your own engagement party, and we provide you with all the resources to do that. We've got a handout on our website that you can download. We've got a facilitator guide, a little poster invitation that you can download as well. And we created those as a way to sort of provide additional resources for anybody who sees the benefit in our work and creative engagement and wants to share that with others. Even if you feel like you're not the most confident like facilitator or kind of group leader, the facilitator guide that we created, or the host guide, looks a little bit like this. So on the one side of the screen, the step 1, lean into your creativity, is what the guests would see in their handout. And the page on the other side is what the facilitator guide looks like. So you get a little bit of a column with some helpful instructions, tips on what to kind of do or say in that moment. We try to not make it too prescriptive. It's not like a script that you just have to read from. It just gives you some helpful kind of hints of like, in this moment, you can ask this question or you can try this activity. Again, you can download all of those resources for free. So if you know of a community or a group of people that you think would definitely benefit from learning more about creative engagement and TimeSlips, you can think about hosting your own engagement party. You can do it in person if you feel comfortable doing so, or even do it virtually like we are doing today. And lastly, we early this year in June released the Creative Care Imagination Kit, which is a physical resource that includes 15 image prompts and 15 beautiful questions and a journal and instruction book that comes with it. You can purchase it wherever books are sold. We developed this kit in collaboration with family caregivers right here in Southeast Michigan, with support from the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation. And we really wanted to design this kit in a way that, one, it was beautiful to look at, right? So it's a really beautifully engaging resource, in addition to being kind of helpful. But we also wanted to try and make it as accessible as possible. So it retails at about $29.99. A few places, different online retailers, I've noticed you can get it actually a lot cheaper than that as well. So if that sounds like could be something that you would be of interest to, it is available. But again, we have many additional resources on our website that are entirely free of charge, so you don't have to purchase a kit to use our techniques. But we wanted to create the kit as a way to provide our resources to people that maybe don't have access to the internet or are unable to get online. And also thinking about family members as well. This is a great intergenerational activity. So we have been testing it out for a while now with different groups. And we find that for particularly for families where there's multiple generations and perhaps older family members are maybe starting to experience some memory loss, having grandchildren or great grandchildren kind of lead this work with them can be a really wonderful way to kind of connect. And the journal can be used as a wonderful way to kind of write down and record stories and shared memories. And then you have a record of those to look at in the future. So again, you can learn more about the TimeSlips Creative Care Imagination Kit on our website as well. But as we're kind of wrapping things up before we have some time for questions today, we'll have a quick recap of our 4 steps for creative engagements. Step 1 was that lean into your creativity. Remember that we are all creative beings, regardless of how we feel about the words creativity or being an artist, right? Creativity is an innate human characteristic. The creativity in everything that we do, especially caregiving. And so we encourage people to really kind of lean into that and tap into that creativity as a way and to use that as a way to connect with others. Using our techniques like asking beautiful questions and yes and, you can create those meaningful moments, whether it's a planned special events like a storytelling session or a creative phone call, or maybe just, in a conversation that you're having, driving in the car to place, you can look out the window and ask a beautiful question and engage with your surroundings. Step 3 being shift from memory to imagination. Remember that this can take time and practice. It is, again, our natural default to want to use shared memories and facts to kind of connect with one another. So shifting away from that and leaning more into yes and can definitely take a little bit of time, but we hope that you'll be willing to give it a try and know that, again, with a little bit more practice, it does become easier. And then last of all, we'll hope that you will consider becoming part of our creative care revolution at TimeSlips. You can access any of our free resources online whenever you want to. If you want to bring TimeSlips to other people in your extended family or networks or communities, you can think about the engagement party and the trainings that are available, and hope that you'll be inspired to share some of our techniques with others. real quick, a few very specific things that you might want to do next now that you've learned a little bit more about our creative engagement techniques. You might consider hosting an engagement party with friends and family members. I know as we sort of gather into the holiday season, some of us might be having in-person gatherings. And if you think that there's other people in your family that would benefit from hearing this information, you could host an informal engagement party and have food and drink and make it a special event. I already mentioned this, but very simply, you could, if you know of somebody who would benefit from learning more about TimeSlips, you could share a link to our online friends and family training with them. Or you could simply reach out to an isolated friend or loved one over the telephone, or post a letter or postcard to them with a beautiful question, just like the one we asked at the beginning of our session: how do you greet someone you love? Even if you can't greet them in person or see them in person, I know I always like it when I get a little sort of note or token in the mail. My grandfather lives in the UK still, will be 90 years old in a couple of weeks and lives in a care home. And to a question earlier about how do we do this work with those who are visually impaired, my grandfather is hard of hearing, so having a phone call conversation with him is virtually impossible at this point. But I will still send him a postcard from time to time with a beautiful question or a little kind of note about what I'm doing, just as a way to let him know that I'm still thinking about him and to bring some kind of creativity into his day. So another example there, right, of how even those simple little acts can actually often go a long way to let someone know that we're thinking and that we care for them. So you can learn more about TimeSlips and our techniques at our website, which is on the screen there, www.timeslips.org. And if you want to reach out directly to me with any questions, my email address is there. It's andrew@timeslips.org. Again, I'm responsible primarily for our friends and family resources. And actually this month being National Family Caregiver Month, we are doing a big kind of push to really spread the word far and wide about our free resources for friends and family caregivers. So I'm also going to drop a link in the chat to a document or sort of promotional package that we just created actually in the last couple of weeks. So let's say that like maybe you are part of an organization or a kind of group and you would love to kind of promote and share TimeSlips with those people. We created a kind of promotional guide with suggestions of how you could do that. If you maybe you have a blog, a caregiver blog, and you want to share something about TimeSlips, we've created some sample language that you can use in a blog post, even simply sharing things on social media, a poster that you can print off and put up in a notice board in a community center, a library, place of worship, anywhere that you think caregivers might might access and might want to learn a little bit more about our techniques. So the link to that promotional kit is in the chat there. Allison has it as well. So if you're on her email list, you might be seeing some of those resources or that promotion coming out pretty soon. And that is the end of the more sort of official part of our presentation. So thank you all for joining us and being creative together. I know we have plenty of time left, which was my hope that we could definitely have some time for sort of conversation and any of the questions about these techniques. So I will stop sharing my screen now. And Allison, I don't know if any other questions kind of came in or if anyone else has any questions in the moment.
Yet. But let's open this back up. If folks would like to unmute themselves or put questions in the chat, both would be totally fine.
I can see Justine, your hand up yet, so go ahead. Oh, you're still muted, Justine.
Sorry. Hi. When I did the training years ago with Ann Bastings in New York, one part of the training that seemed really important at the time, like working in nursing homes and creating stories, was adding the person's name. Do you still make that a priority or not so much? Because we used to have a piece of paper where we'd write, Justine said this, or Anne said this, and we'd make sure their name was attached to what they said. Is that still?
Yes and no. I mean, like in the sort of setting up of like the creative storytelling event, we are very big on like, use name tags so you can always like, call on people by name. And in the storytelling like technique itself, personally, like it's a little back and forth. Sometimes I will, I will include the person's name. Sometimes I won't. But it does sort of go, I think, maybe what you're referring to is like there is always that we do try to stress to people, especially if you're doing this with a big group, is that if maybe somebody is like, you know, maybe a little bit more reluctant to engage, or maybe rarely does when they do say something, like that's a great opportunity to say like, oh, and Justine said, to make sure that like when they hear their name again, that they're definitely being sort of acknowledged and thanked for the work. So yeah, I mean, I'd say it still is a part of our work. You know, I didn't include the names of the older adults in the story that I shared, primarily because I sadly lost the note that I had, the big piece of paper that I had with their names. But we do like to, we do talk a lot about also the importance of like providing, like, think about like social roles and like the loss of social roles that many older adults, particularly that maybe might move into a care community, lose. So like they're no longer like, you know, husband or wife or like whatever their job was, right? So using words like I said earlier, like when I'm meeting with a group of storytellers, right? Using that language very intentionally, that like, you know, you are all here as storytellers, as artists now. You know?
Thank you.
You're welcome. And Karen, I saw your comment there too about wanting to use these, practice these techniques with your husband. So please feel free to keep in touch if you have any kind of questions as you give it a try. And thank you, Sandra, for your comment too. Anyone else have any other questions?
I was curious, is there a deck of cards with beautiful questions, just a separate thing? Or are they on your website? Like just to...
So the Imagination Kit does have, I have one up here I can show you. Actually, no, that's my, my demo one is, I was just using it in a session earlier this week. So the Imagination Kit does have both image cards and the beautiful question cards. But here you go, here's some of those. And the kit itself, on the beautiful question cards, here you go. Question I asked you earlier, if you had the ability to fly, where might you go? Addition on the back has what we call like additional thoughtful actions. So we added those as an example, like you can ask the beautiful question just as itself, but then if you want to take the conversation a little bit further, like there's some suggestions of activities you can do. Some are more questions, some are maybe more other sort of creative activities like draw, you know, create something together, maybe write little notes and put them in a box that you can give to somebody. So yeah, so in the kit itself, there are 15 beautiful question cards and then 15 image prompts. I'll give you a glimpse of some of the kind of images that we used. We made them all black and white. So that while a lot of them are sort of older images, good one here from Chicken Bone Beach in Atlantic City. Some of them are a little bit, well, here's a, you know, common one too. Some of them are a little bit more contemporary, but we made them all black and white so that they all would have that kind of timeless feel to them. There's a dog here with a feather boa. And the images that we used in here and the images that we have on our website, I mean, really, you can use any type of image prompt. It doesn't have to be photographs. I said earlier, it can be paintings, drawings as well. With photographs, we find often it's more successful if there's images that have like movement, music suggested. So I think I've got one here somewhere.
I was going to say, I in the program I also did trainings for people. I'm like, it's all coming back to me, but we did use, it was black and white and with Xerox. It was just Xerox images. Actually.
That's another reason we did them black and white for the kit, was that if maybe like
right. For anyone who wants to do it at home, I used to just go to a shop and find whimsical cards, greeting cards. Just, you know, just the front, like they're kind of silly or fun cards, very playful. And then I would Xerox them, make them into 8x10s. And then bring those in. And that's what we would, you know, each person would get their own. But if you're working with, you know, one loved one, you can just bring it in, look at them together.
So I'm glad you said that, because we try to encourage people to use images that maybe have some kind of like movement or sound suggested, because music often, you know, opens up a lot of folks. Children and animals are often really popular too. I think animals, it's a lot easier for all of us, regardless of cognitive ability, to like to lean into the more kind of creative storytelling, right? Because like we know that like these penguins aren't called, you know, Milk and Cookie or whatever, but like we go into that like imagination a lot easier, right? And children, right? We all have been children. Many of us, you know, may have relationships with children as well. So like tapping into the childhood, you know, aspect is helpful. And something like a question we get quite often is, again, our techniques are not designed for reminiscence purposes. However, let's say that like you're trying to kind of connect with a family member. Let's say I'm, you know, trying to do a session with a grandparent. And I know that like, you know, my granddad was a butcher, right? So if I brought in some images that have like some connection to like, you know, his life as a butcher, right? It might unlock some sort of memory there, right? But again, like starting the conversation with beautiful questions like, what do you think is happening here? Where might we be? What shall we call this person? It may unlock names of, you know, friends or colleagues or family members or like shared memories, right? So an example I use is when we were testing out the kit in the kind of greater Detroit area. We were testing out lots of different images to see which ones kind of worked well. And I was working with a group right in downtown Detroit where many of the folks, the day center program, were former like factory employees. So I knew like that the, you know, imagery around like that kind of any mention of like the plant or like that part of like Detroit's history, like they had experience of, right? And I brought those in and I had some incredible like fun times like showing these images and hearing stories that were, you know, people, you know, with quite advanced stages of dementia able to like take us back to like, you know, when they worked at the plant and would clock off the bar they would go to across the street and the, you know, music they listened to and would party till whatever hours of the morning. And so we were able to like, you know, to hear like, you know, memories of that person's life. But again, like we didn't get there by starting the conversation. Tell me about what it was like working in the plant. You know,
Right.
what did you do after you clocked off? It was the image prompt that we started with and the kind of creative inspiration, and that unlocked some of those memories. So sometimes it happens. It's not always the maybe not the response that we want, right? But occasionally it can happen. So if you are, you know, a little creative with the type of images that you share to a family member, if there is something that you're trying to kind of unlock, it can sometimes happen. Same with names too. Like often when you ask somebody, can we call this something, they may, you know, say a name from a, you know, from the family, right? That shows that it's still there, right? You may not make that connection to that person, but hearing that name can mean a lot. I know we got a lot more time, so anyone else have any other questions or?
This is Russ. So I just wanted to thank you for the concept of the person who can't remember a name for something and just asking, well, what would you like to call it? It's brilliant.
Yeah. It's amazingly simple too, right? And I think that that's the kind of beauty of it, is that you know, so often it, you know, again, as I said, we can our default setting might be to kind of like want to like provide the name or answer for them, but trying to put ourselves, like imagine what it feels like to be in that position constantly, you know, it can be kind of demeaning, and just a different way of kind of reframing and asking a question can actually be quite empowering. So hope you can give it a try. I did want to go back to the question that Karen asked earlier, Karen, if you're still with us, about doing this with visually impaired folks. I know I responded to that a little bit, and we did the phone kind of demonstration. But something that I kind of do a lot more frequently now, if I'm doing a session with like with the group in person, is again, I will usually kind of use black and white images that I print off. I'll try to pick images that don't have any like anything that might be kind of like distracting or like maybe kind of blurry, and it's really hard to kind of figure out what that is. But usually what I'll do at every start of session is I'll give like, without trying to like dictate too much like what the story should be, like a very simple description of like, you know, so in the photograph, there's a man and a woman dancing. The man is wearing a cap with a feather in it. and a check shirt. Just like, a little bit of a visual description to help people that might maybe struggle to see the image on the card or the page. A little bit of a visual sense of what the image looks like. And then sometimes, I've never done sessions where I know that there has been somebody in the kind of group that is, completely blind and unable to see the image. But I try to do that just as a sort of general sort of tip, I guess, now that I offer to other folks, as recognizing that, yeah, there may be different kind of levels of vision in the room, and just as a way to kind of involve everybody. But also just asking, everyone even to like close your eyes and imagine, a place or something, right? And you can still then ask them questions in the same way that you would the creative storytelling session like we did.
Russ again here. So any recommendations on how large or small of a group it is? Sort of, is there a best practice around that?
It depends. I mean, I've done the work with a small group of 1 or 2 to like 20 plus. It definitely, if you're doing it with a larger group, it's definitely much helpful to have other, helpers there with you, right? So we don't go into it in so much detail in this kind of the engagement party, the friends and family training. But when, like Justine was mentioning, we have other kind of training that folks can go through, and we talk a lot more about like other roles that folks can take in the storytelling process. So like if one person is asking the question, someone else's job is to respond, right? I know things are very different in, care homes and assisted living facilities now, and like volunteers and staff, there may not be as many people, right, as there usually would be. But when I've done sessions pre-COVID in those sort of contexts, any additional staff or kind of volunteer that can be in the room as an additional, like someone to echo, right? If there's somebody sitting kind of quite far to the back of the room that maybe says something that I don't hear, the staff can say, oh, Andrew, Joy back here said this, right? So that there's still a way to kind of, to get Joy's response into the story as well. So if you're doing it with a larger group, definitely helps to have at least 1 or 2 people helping you along. If you're doing it with smaller groups, I think it's, I will often be facilitator and scribe and echo back as well. And I think then about like, depending on how active the group are, between 5 and 10, I think is manageable. Knowing too that when you do this, if you do this with one person, it's a lot different because you're waiting a lot more for a response, right? So again, that kind of like getting used to silence and knowing that just because somebody hasn't responded right away doesn't mean that they're not processing the question or might want to respond, right?
And just curious, because I haven't done this in a long time, but when I did the trainings, we had big, newsprint paper up, with marker for everyone to see what was being said. And I did have an assistant, because it is really hard to hear and write and respond all at the same time. And I'm wondering though, and this is probably just, how important is it in a group for everyone to see what you're writing on the board versus having someone just writing notes maybe on a pad and then reading back versus actually seeing it up there? Do you have any preference or suggestion?
Not really. There's a place in sort of Metro Detroit where I kind of do a regular session in memory care, and the group sort of can be anywhere from like 8 to 12 or so. And for that, it's not the full size sort of flip chart paper. It's a smaller one. So it's like I usually have it in front of me on the table, and I'm sort of writing, but then I can also kind of hold it up.
Okay.
So I think it is helpful sometimes to have that kind of like the visual aspect of the story to show people. If it's a smaller group, I will sometimes kind of just use a notebook, but we'll kind of like periodically during the session, like say like, well, let's read back what we've got so far, just to kind of, bring people back. But I will say that another reason that to have like the words available or like the text of the story available is in that same community. A couple of years ago now, I was working, doing sessions there, and there was a gentleman who was usually very unresponsive, like during our sessions. But after like the first couple of ones, like I noticed one day when I was reading the story back, like he was actually reading it with me. So I was like, oh, like, Ken, do you want to read the story back to us? And that like became Ken's role. Like he didn't offer any like suggestions to the story often, but like he became like the reader, the narrator, right? So that like another like little example, right, of like any, like you see somebody like responding in some way, like can we, you know, give that person that role now, right? And include them in the work.
And if you are just doing it with your partner or grandma or whoever, do you, just one person, do you think taking notes and reading it back is important, or do you just pretty much just go with the flow and try to remember what they said and just kind of have it together?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, personal preference. I think for some, there, like for the family aspect, I think like keeping a record of it is sometimes like really nice, because you never like know what, like how cool the story, beautiful the story might be, right? So I think I encourage people to kind of like write it down just in case like you get some gold, right? And you want to keep that. When beautiful questions, I will rarely you know, respond or kind of write actively. I'll kind of just use those and have the conversation. Great thing about those, using them kind of one-on-one too, is that it especially when like we've been using the kit and sort of we were testing it out with small groups, is that the you know, the roles of like who's facilitating and who's responding can sometimes become blurred. And so even if it's the person that is traditionally the person being cared for, right, can actually like facilitate the work by looking at, like by picking up a beautiful question and asking that question, right? And a story I often share that connects the beautiful question that I asked at the beginning of our session, the how do you greet someone you love? Again, as we were testing out this kit and the new resources over the last couple of years here in the Detroit area, I was meeting with a group of, it was a caregiver support group connected to the Alzheimer's Association that would meet for their support group while their loved ones were in like a social group. So they would do yoga or other activities at the same time. So we did our sort of engagement party session with the caregivers, and then we came back together with all the family members to kind of practice some of the sessions. And so I had some of the demo cards at the time, and I asked that question, how do you greet someone you love? There was like a little bit of, you know, pause in the room waiting for a response. And then there was a married couple there, husband caring for his wife living with dementia. She was the one that actually responded first without words, but she responded by very gently bringing her husband towards her and kissing him. And as you can imagine, like it was a beautiful like display of affection between not caregiver and care partner, but like husband and wife, right? I think husband got a little like red face and embarrassed, like, you know, that happening in front with an audience, right? But at the same time, like there was a moment for everyone in the room to sort of see that, like, again, what we saw there was not, the patient, right? It was, you know, two people who love each other. And despite all of the challenges that they're dealing with and facing, like still, you know, there are still those people, right? So yeah, that's one of my favorite stories or memories of doing this work, is it's that reminder of, I'm not a caregiver myself, but I imagine for many of you who are caring for a loved one, that so often, we lose that sort of the reminders of those roles, right, and become fixed on the new roles that we have to kind of take on. So. All right.
Okay, well, if there aren't other questions or comments, I think we can just plan to wrap up a few minutes early. Last call for questions. Okay.
Well, I have one question. Sorry, I feel like I'm asking all the questions, but I'm just wondering if you're working one-on-one again. If I haven't worked so much one-on-one, are there any common obstacles people say, like, oh, it was awkward, it was really weird to suddenly be engaging this way with my husband? Or is there anything that comes up that are common difficulties that maybe could prevent someone from doing this, or does that not happen?
I mean, it does happen. I think, again, more often than not, when it's one-on-one is the time, is like and be like, as the facilitator, becoming more comfortable with like sitting in silence, right? And letting that happen, right? And
What if it's your spouse or someone that you have a different type of relationship with, and now you're trying to look at a image and make up a story that's,
yeah.
I mean, does that, I don't know.
No, and again, I think that's primarily like the biggest sort of challenge that we hear. We do like in the friends and family training, and in like the instructions that come with the kit too. Like, I'm not trying to like plug the kit again, but there are some additional like what if this happens, right?
Like troubleshooting.
So I think I covered some of them, right? Like if someone says, I don't know, or like someone says like, why are we doing this, right?
Yeah.
And our kind of more general responses like go back to those like positive affirmations, like, you know, it's a like, again, I don't know either, right? And that's okay. And there's freedom like in saying that, right? And that often like that is quite like when someone is able to hear that, that can sometimes be the like, oh, okay, like
Right,
then
let's
now we
give it
get
a
it.
try.
Like,
Let's just have some fun. Or
like,
let's,
Yeah, it strikes me that there's a certain silliness in creating the stories together, and that makes it fun. You know, that's, yeah.
There's definitely, and you know, going back into the you know, the conversation we had about creativity, right? It is, I think, easier for me and easier for people like Anne, who founded our organization, right? Like we have our background in training, and like we're okay with like performing, right? And like if I'm going to tell the story, like I can like lean into my like theater training now and like perform it for you, right? And that, I mean, there's in the same way that like when we read a bedtime story or like a kid's story to children, right? And we like take on like the voices, right? And like if we're going to go to that place, like kids will go with you, right? So same thing, like if you can sort of lean into the silliness and the kind of creativity too, I think that is like, it can be infectious in some ways, in a good way, right? So yeah, so that the positive affirmations and, you know, reminders too, it's okay, we're just making this up. Even like, so something that comes up a lot like with yes and is that because we introduce it as a concept that comes from like the world of like comedy, is that the responses to the conversations are always going to be funny and joyful. And that's not the case, right? You can still use yes and, even if somebody like says something that's really sad and really hard to hear. So, you know, I heard a lot. I imagine many of you will have heard this too, if you have a loved one living in a care community, or you work with people living in care community, like that, I want to go home, I want to go home. Like to hear someone say that over and over again, like, why can't I go home? Is heartbreaking. Like it's really hard to hear that, right? And there's another good example, right, of like in that moment, like one thing to do, and I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, is to like distract them and like shift focus to something else. But but I think folks who have done TimeSlips for a while and are kind of more skilled with our kind of techniques can sort of like still use yes and in that moment and like sit with that person in that sadness and say like, you want to go home? I'm you know, I hear you say like, I want to go home. Can you tell me about home? Like, what does home feel like to you? What does home smell like? When you think of home, what smells do you think of, right? And that might like, you know, elicit a response or, you know, a feeling, and we can say, oh, what can we do in this space to make it feel like that? Or maybe we can make some cookies and we can have that smell, right, of freshly baked cookies from the kitchen, right? Again, I think that like that's a little bit more sort of skilled facilitator, but I share that example too, as like I think the more you become comfortable using that yes and approach and like meeting people exactly where they are, even if that's in a moment of sadness, and also recognizing that those are valid emotions too, that, you know, we're allowed to have, right? So letting people kind of express them in a healthy way too can be really helpful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
They're really good questions. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, I did a little bit of a false alarm. So let me ask one more time. Any final questions, comments for Andrew?
Just thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Andrew.
you.
So much for joining us today. I certainly got a lot out of this. It sounds like everyone else did as well. We would love to have you back the next time we offer this.
Yeah.
For those of you who've joined us today, the recording of this will make available within the next few weeks. Andrew, are you comfortable sharing your PowerPoint so I can send it out to participants?
Yeah, that's fine. And I can send you to, like, we have some, like some of the content that I already shared with you that we're kind of pushing for the promotion of these resources. Like I've got like a very simple 1-page document that describes like our training, the engagement parties, the kit. I can share a couple of those things with you that you can, share via email. So
Great. Yeah, so I will send out all of the engagement party materials as well as the PowerPoint from today out to everyone who's registered for this. And thank you all for joining. Thank you again to Andrew. It was fantastic.
thank you. Great to meet you all.
Take care, everyone. Have a
Thanks
good
so much.